Right, well this is my ranking of the Jethro Tull albums from the late 60s through the 70s, stopping at the 80s, as I am usually wont to do. Driving and cycling around the Buckinghamshire countryside, the hyper-English sound of Jethro Tull is the perfect soundtrack, and much of it works well as background music, but some of it is truly lifts my heart. I only ever owned the album that is number one on my list back in the day, but I knew all the early albums. I borrowed them off friends and I taped them on cassettes and played them a lot. Also, Jethro Tull were played a lot on Wonderful Radio 1. They had hit singles and appeared on Top of the Pops. Ian Anderson had his signature flautist on one leg and manic googly-eyed stare. They had great non-album singles like Living in the Past, Witch's Promise and Life's a Long Song. And later on in the 70s there was Never Too Old to Rock and Roll and Songs from the Wood. And my particular favourite seasonal song, Ring Out the Solstice Bells. When they started selling CDs from the 70s at bargain prices, I started a Jethro Tull collection. But I stopped after Minstrel in the Gallery. Several times I played through the CDs, but I stopped there. It's just that one particular album sort of put me off everything else. So obviously that's going to come low on the list. Recently I found a compilation CD in a charity shop and I bought it because I probably thought I might do a Jethro Tull songs listing. But this inspired me to buy the 5 CD box set, which I found was going very cheap on Amazon. And even though by the time I bought this, I already had the album Songs from the Wood. Of the only 3 of the songs on this compilation apply to my criterion. The other 2 would be the album A, which I don't think sounded at all like a Jethro Tull album. It was just like a fairly insipid rock album, dad rock, whatever. That would come quite low on my ranking. And the other one was Broadsword and the Beast, which despite the fact it's got lots of synths on and it's a bit 80s, this would actually come quite high on my listing, but I'm not counting either of them. I also have the Live at Montreux DVD, and all of these things I bought in charity shops or at library sales. And this is okay, but it's a later lineup. It's not what I would consider peak Tull. And I have this CD which has got a collection of songs similar to the one on the Montreux. It's a later version of Tull, but it has got the Isle of Wight set, which is much more raw. It's much more my kind of thing. In fact, it was seeing the Tull Isle of Wight set, probably on Sky Arts, that made me get back into Jethro Tull. But very recently I found the album, an LP of the live album Bursting Out at a library, at a vinyl sale at Wickham Arts Centre. And this is excellent. This is like the thing I should have bought first. It's actually the thing I've bought last. But it has great versions of the songs. I mean, the versions of Locomotive Breath and Aqualung are amazing on this. And even some of the songs which on the studio albums I'm not that keen on, like Skating Away on the Thin Ice of a New Day and Minstrel in the Gallery, I really enjoyed listening to them on this. And the song Cross-Eyed Mary is amazing. It's not a song I would normally have chosen as a favourite, but on this album it's excellent. It really rocks. Yes. If I had bought this earlier, I might not have bothered with the rest of them. So anyway, this is not part of the ranking, but it's quite important. So this will shock a few of the Tull fans, but my number 12 is Minstrel in the Gallery. Now, I've tried very hard to explain why I don't like this album. I've listened to it quite a lot recently because I wanted to find some reason why I didn't like it. It's possibly a bit too jerky. That's one of the things that occurred to me, and it's sometimes, well, often Jethro Tull can take a fairly average song and bring excitement to it with all the instrumental fireworks, but none of that seems to work for me. It's got brilliant playing, it's got the excellent D. Palmer's string arrangement, but it's constantly flitting about and it gets me on edge. I also think the guitar is like too sharp and spiky, and it makes me just feel a bit uncomfortable. I prefer that heavier, distorted sound that they used to have on the early albums, where Martin Barr sounded a bit more like Tony Iommi, who had briefly been in Jethro Tull. I'm not even much of a fan of the title track and the big epic Baker Street Blues, which just has the chorus line and the riff just seem quite contrived, and it sounds more like it was assembled rather than written in any kind of organic way. So I can see why people like it, and I wouldn't say it's a bad album. It's just my least favourite. At number 11, I have the first one, This Was. Now it's quite hard to rank this album because it's not really like the other albums, and I have a history with it because when I was in the Scouts, in the Scout hut, we had a big radiogram, and somebody who obviously donated the radiogram donated 2 albums, and one was Aftermath by the Rolling Stones, and the other was This Was by Jethro Tull. And of course the weird thing is that we were listening to this album in like 1970, thinking it was quite old, it's a bit dated. It was back in the 60's. But the song for Jeffrey seems to have stuck with me throughout my whole life. It's on any time you have a Jethro Tull compilation, it'll be on it. And of course they do it on the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus with Tony Iommi on guitar. And it has that strange vocal sound that they seem to use a lot, where it sounds like he's singing through a megaphone, or maybe through one of those mics you use for recording harmonica. And the other odd thing is, of course, like when you see it on the Rock and Roll we see it on the Rock and Roll Circus, it's the bass player is playing harmonica and bass at the same time, which I think is quite clever. And the opening song, I think it's the opening song, That Sunday Feeling, is that is a bit more like the albums that came. It's the other songs are all sort of bluesier, and they got a bit of jazz, and I'm not a great fan of the blues. I quite like Mick Abrams' guitar, and the CD has a non-album single called Love Story, which also seems to be a bit like the music that would follow this album. At number 10, I have War Child. This is another one that will shock Jethro Tull fans. Now, War Child is much brighter and more commercial than the album that came before it, Passion Play. But it has the song Bungle in the Jungle, which I've never been a fan of. It's quite poppy, and it did get played on the radio. And it also has Skating Away on the Thin Ice of a New Day, which is a great melody. It's got a poetic lyric. But to me, the lyric and the melody, they don't seem to go together that well. And one of the things that does annoy me a bit about Jethro Tull is the way that Ian Anderson will have a tune in his head and won't necessarily bother to write enough words for that tune. And so you end up with these like hiccuping type sounds, which, to elongate the melody that he's singing to match up with the melody that the band are playing. It's sort of like scat singing, I suppose. And sometimes I don't really notice this. And sometimes I actually like it. Sometimes it really works on, like, Your Wise Men Don't Know How It Feels to Be Thick as a Brick. Yeah, for some reason I like that. But for some reason on other Jethro Tull songs it does annoy me. But and having just got this live album, I do actually prefer I quite liked the live version. And I did see the band that played on that album live, and I can remember thinking I saw them at Hammersmith Odeon, and thinking it was quite good then. It's just the recorded version. I think the highlights on the War Child album, I've got it written down. Track 3 is a song called Ladies, and track 9 a song called The Third Hurrah. And there are some good bonus tracks. There's this really nice sort of light classical sounding instrumental, which sounds a bit like the backing to the dreaded Hare That Lost His Spectacles, which is on my number 9, Passion Play. Now, I suppose people would think it a bit odd that I've put Passion Play above Minstrel in the Gallery and War Child, but I was surprised how much I liked this album. I got it cheap. I mean, it's one of their least popular albums. I think I bought it new for about £3.50. And I think for that reason I never really gave it that much of a chance. But recently, because I was going to do this, I did seriously listen to it a lot. And I don't think it holds together as well as Thick as a Brick, but he was obviously working to this idea of a passion play, and I think that, I mean, for me the lyrics, it's like the lyrics are quite unmusical. There are phrases using the words like Fulham Road and Kentish Town and I'll go to the foot of our stairs. Now, they're quite memorable, but it does have some decent melodies, which might have been more appealing had they had more lyrical lyrics. Also, I'm not keen on all the biblical stuff. I haven't really gone into studying what it's all about, but yeah, it doesn't really appeal to me. But it was the one time they really tried to make a prog album, and it's not bad. There are pieces in it that would match Genesis or Yes, but one of the notes I've put here though is that there is this story, the hare lost his spectacles, which you don't want to hear that story too many times, like more than once. However, the backing is quite interesting, and it is sort of possible to switch off listening to the words and just hear the backing. However, when they made the CD, they should have made it a separate track so you could skip it. Now, I think that Jethro Tull tend to dabble in blues, jazz, folk and Eastern styles of music, but they seem seldom to go very far away from conventional harmony. And I prefer the long pieces, like by Van de Graaff Generator, where you have a bit of dissonance that sort of draws you in. And this piece is 40 minutes long, and you would have expected after 40 minutes there'd be some real hands in the air, big climax number, which also doesn't happen. And that might be just what happens in passion plays. I've not been that inclined to investigate passion plays. Number 8, I have Stormwatch. And Stormwatch was the final album. The end of the 70s saw them doing 3, which are albums that are sort of folk rock. They're like folk prog. They're sort of like if Fairport Convention had carried on in the Legion Leaf thing and got more progressive, more like Genesis and Yes perhaps. And this is an album that I don't think it has any weak songs. And the fact that it's number 8 probably indicates that how highly I think of the other albums. It's got a song on it called Home, which is like, it's quite Radio 2 friendly and hummable. And it has a song called Dark Ages, which is quite Celtic in a sort of Thin Lizzy way. It has a song called Warm Sporran, which is semi-comic Scottish humming chorus fun with a touch of funk. The song Elegy is a lovely ending to this album, and usually I would need to be in the mood to listen to a Jethro Tull album, but I think I could probably listen to this album in any mood. Number 7 is the album Heavy Horses, which is another folky album that doesn't have a bad track. I was partly inspired to get the 5 CD set because I fell in love with the title track when I had the compilation CD, even though I probably already knew it, but hearing it made me appreciate it. Well, hearing it on the compilation album obviously made me appreciate it more. I also fell in love with a song called Moths. That's all I've really got to say. Another excellent album, which I probably could listen to in any mood. At number 6, I have Too Old to Rock and Roll, Too Young to Die. And the title track is one of my all-time favourite Jethro Tull songs. I remember it from the radio. I always loved that mix of rock and classical, and always wished the guitar, the Chuck Berry guitar, went on for a bit longer, which it does on the live versions. Another reason why I keep going on about this new live double album that I just bought. Generally the music on this album is quite simple for Tull, but it's probably because it's a reflection of the times they are singing about, the 50s basically. And this album was released in the era of pub rock, Dr. Feelgood and Kilburn and the High Road, so I think it probably fitted in with that era as well. The songs are not so harsh and spiky, and they don't suddenly veer off at odd tangents. There's some nice strings, and there's some nice sax on the song From a Dead Beat to an Old Geezer, which that whole song just gives me a nice warm glow. It is a moving reminiscence of a past time, with a comfortingly familiar style of melody and references to fondly remembered female fashion of the time, and Charlie Parker and Jack Kerouac. I did not always agree with Ian Anderson, but he was right about never being too old. It is basically a rock opera, and it comes to a fairly satisfying conclusion with the song The Checkered Flag, Dead or Alive. It's possibly a bit too subdued for a rock opera, but it winds it all up quite nicely. But following that on the CD is possibly my favourite track on the album. It's a bonus track called A Small Cigar, which is really funny. It sounds like they didn't finish it, but what there is of it, which is like acoustic guitar, piano and vocal, I think it stands up. I think that's probably one of the best tracks on the CD. Now, numbers 5 and 4 are Benefit and Stand Up. Now, I heard both of these albums about the same time that I heard Aqualung. And this was a time when we were all into heavy music. And once you got the first few Black Sabbath albums and Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple, you were looking for more heavy music. Jethro Tull was what you probably would have ended up with. And it's these albums, well, Stand Up is a bit more folky, but they do have some fairly mean, distorted guitar riffs on both of them. I probably prefer Benefit because the thing I have against Stand Up is the song Fat Man. I've always been fat, and technically it's not been my fault. Benefit has a great opening song with You There to Help Me. The CD is but boosted by the bonus tracks, the non-album singles Witch's Promise and Teacher. And equally, Stand Up, it's got I think that's the one that's got Living in the Past and Sweet Dream, which is probably better than the bonus tracks on Benefit. And the new song, the opening song, New Day Yesterday, is one of their best songs. But I don't know if it's the digitizing, if it's the mastering, but it just does not sound any good either on the CD or the compilation. But needless to say, the live version sounds really good. Yes, it's also the song We Used to Know is another favourite. It's quite close to being a simple rock song. And I also like the song Reasons for Waiting, which has this gorgeous flute and string part. And I think over the whole Jethro Tull discography I'm looking at, it's Dee Palmer's string arrangements which are probably more important to the sound than Martin Barr's lead guitar. Number 3, Aqualung. I find Aqualung to be dark and slightly uncomfortable sounding, and a bit too serious. But then, so was Black Sabbath. I remember the canvas type feeling of the sleeve, but I was not sure as a schoolboy I wanted songs about religion and dirty old men and tramps and stuff. And it's very acoustic. At the time I wanted to hear fairly serious rock music. There's a lot of acoustic on this. Although listening to it again, it's not as acoustic as I remembered it. Listening to it again, I appreciate the piano playing. Particularly, I think the song "Wandering Aloud" on the CD. There is one of the bonus tracks is a piano-orientated version of that, which I was listening to that, and then I noticed on the whole album. I mean, at the time, I was probably into Hammond organ, and this album's got some really nice piano on it. I think, obviously it's got the song Aqualung and Locomotive Breath, which are two of the very best songs in the Jethro Tull catalogue. But the mock Bible passage on the cover it tended to put me off, and I was a school kid having to do divinity lessons, and the songs like, so the cover would indicate it's sort of anti-religious, and then you listen to the songs and they're not anti-religious, they're sort of anti-organised religion, and in places it actually seems to be quite a pro-religion, and in either way it tends to be a bit preachy. Like I said, this is not something I really wanted to be into when I was a schoolboy. Number 2, we have Songs from the Wood. In the late 70s, Jethro Tull would not have been on any kind of playlist that I would have made. But the single Songs from the Wood, I would have said that was a guilty pleasure. And of course I liked the song Solstice Bells, which one of the few Christmas songs I actually would... at Christmas I get out my copy of Songs from the Wood and I play it all the way through. The rest of the year I skip that song. This album is actually often suggested to me by Amazon, and I bought this second hand for only a couple of quid. Definitely less than the price of a pint of cider, including postage. And it's very close to being my favourite Jethro Tull album. The 2 albums that came before this, Heavy Horses and Stormwatch, they both have, as I've said, they both have very good selection of songs with not really a bad track. My criticism of the songs on things like Minstrel in the Gallery, that they seem to be songs that have been contrived rather than composed. Well, rather than composed organically, I think is what I said. On this album, the songs seem to be those kind of songs that just come to you, they follow you around, and you can't get rid of them until you actually write them and play them, and they're out there in the world. The songs are quite folky, with folky themes taken from folklore, like Jack in the Green or Hunting Girl. They are not so much the folk rock of Fairport Convention and Steel Eye Span, but more the medieval sound often found in 70s prog rock bands like Gentle Giant. There are Jethro Tull signatures of heavy distorted guitar riffs and light airy flute passages. And it starts with that amazing a cappella beginning to Songs from the Wood, which is a stunning bit of singing. I particularly like the song The Whistler, which has that rat-tat line that just calls out to be clapped along with. And there is the song Fire at Midnight, which is possibly the sweetest love song I've ever heard on any Jethro Tull album. Number 1, I have, obviously, if you've been paying attention, Thick as a Brick. So it was a friend of mine had the copy of Aqualung, and obviously I taped it and played it a lot, and I was quite familiar with it. So I bought Thick as a Brick when it came out, because that's what we used to do back in those days. And I think these are the 2 extremes of Jethro Tull. Aqualung is dark and heavy, and Thick as a Brick is bright and light and breezy with a British Python-esque humour to it. I think one of the... Aqualung is possibly a serious observation of low lifes and religious hypocrisy. And Thick as a Brick is just like an elaborate joke. I think if the tracks on Thick as a Brick were separate, like on a normal album, I think nearly all of them would be in my top 10 Jethro Tull songs. And the instrumental passages are some of my top 10 Jethro Tull moments. It pretends to be a musical setting of a poem, supposedly written by a child genius. And the album came wrapped in a mock-up of a local newspaper, featuring the article about the child genius on its front page. The rest of the paper is filled with other mock articles, with typically English innuendo. And it has TV listings and small ads, etc., all written with that touch of Monty Python type humour. I remember once looking at it, because you could spend hours looking at it. It's the one album cover that lasted longer than listening to the album. I remember once finding a star next to a show in the radio listings, and then I looked on the page to find out what the star meant, and it said not in colour. This is my favourite Jethro Tull album, and it might be my favourite prog rock album. It has great lyrics, great tunes, and a lot of Hammond organ and a lack of synthesizers. I think that everything about it is accessible, everything is quite memorable, and it has a nice ratio between the vocal, the flute, and all the other instrumentation. And the thing about it is just so English. I've said before about just, I live in a sort of scenic part of the southeast, and this to me is the sound of the scenery I live in, both the urban and the countryside. And also the thing about this is it predates that 1990s postmodern irony thing. That thing where you do the thing but in such a way as you do not commit to it. And it's called arch, and it may be a parody or a pastiche, but by not being the thing that it's supposed to be, it is beyond criticism. And it is a bit like that. It's apparently people had said that Aqualung, the album that came out before it was a concept album, so Ian Anderson wrote the ultimate concept album just to spite them, and that's probably quite English as well. So I think it works both as a parody and as a real concept album. And I saw Jethro Tull at Hammersmith Odeon, sort of 77. I should imagine, I think it's the same band that made the Bursting Out live album. And they did the shorter version of Thick as a Brick, which was probably the high spot of the evening for me. And the CD has also got the shorter live version, and it is also on the live album. So that was my pick of Jethro Tull albums from 1969 to 1980.